Normally, when we get started, I am tired because I just woke up and I'm not ready to go. But this morning, I don't know what the deal is. I've only had one sip of tea so far and I'm wide awake. I'm ready to go. So I'm just warning you, I'm full of that today. We, we are in Hebrews chapter 2, and I don't know if you guys enjoyed the email conversation that we had over the week. That was fantastic. We were continuing to talk about the fullness or how Jesus is fully God. And if you're like, wow, I don't remember that email conversation, that's because we didn't actually have one. I'm just messing with you.
Okay, you got me.
Yeah, so but that is the topic that we've been talking about. We are in Hebrews, we're in chapter 2, we're going to be through 10 verses 13. And I mentioned this before pretty much every time, just so we're all on the same page. In chapter 1, we looked at how Jesus is divine and how he is God, and the author talks about how he's the creator and how he's over the angels and how the angels are his servants. And the main key point that he's trying to make is that Jesus is better than those things, than these other supernatural beings. And now we've switched gears and we're really focused in on his divinity, not on his divinity, on his humanity, on how Jesus is fully man. And we kind of talked about that a little bit. And I want to get that conversation started again. But before we do that, let's look at the passage that we're going to look at today, um, just to make sure that we are in the right place and we're talking about what we're supposed to be talking about. So let's read Hebrews chapter 2, 10 through 13. And let's see who's up for reading this morning. Charlie, you want to read?
Sure.
Can you read chapter 2, verses 10 through 13?
Okay. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things, and by whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. For he who both sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all of one. For which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren, saying, I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly, I will sing praise to you. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, here am I, the children whom God has given me.
So, thank you, Charlie. Before we get started, I want to bring up just a historical point, something that happened during this particular period of time, and happened is not the right word, but um, during this particular time, there was people who were following lots of gods. There was a pantheon of gods, and the some of them, there was a lot of them, but we have a Greek community that are following the Greek gods, and then we're having a Roman community who are following Roman gods, and a lot of those are very similar or the same, with just different names. But part of their culture and their idea was that they had these gods who were gods, but they were kind of like man. They were kind of in the shape and form of a man, but they weren't. They were God, and not God. They were gods, multiples. None of them was omnipotent, but they were powerful and immortal and all these things. And they might come down to earth to talk with people, us mere mortals. And the way they would do that is they would change their form so that they would be in the form of a man. And they would do that for various reasons, usually none of them good, just for entertainment or to mess with man or to want to experience something. But they would come in the form of a man. And and it wasn't exclusively man. They could also come in the form of an animal or some other things. They might hang out with man, but they would hide and look like an old man. But they weren't an old man if they looked like one, right? They were just in the form of an old man. If you went to go smack them, they could change their form back to a god and they could smack you right back. So that was kind of how this in this time, this is kind of how they were thinking of as when gods were coming down in the form of a man. That's what they were doing. But here we're talking about something that is different, because Jesus didn't come down in the form of a man. He came down as a man. And I just want to point out there's a distinct difference here between how they looked at a God who might come down to earth versus Jesus, who is God, and he came down to earth. And he did it through one thing that was very critical, which is he was born as a man. And so I just want to bring that out because I think as I was going through this and thinking about the discussion we had last week, I think this is one aspect that we really didn't cover, which when we're talking about how Jesus is fully man, one of the aspects of that is he was actually born as a man, which meant a couple of things. One, it means he gets all of the promises that God has made to man because his ancestry can be traced down to Adam. So when God gives this promise to Adam, and then sometimes he gives promises to other children of Adam, because Jesus is in that lineage, he has all rights and responsibilities of being a man because of his lineage, because he is born as man. And I just wanted to remind us about this. This is really cool. This is interesting. And I can give another example, and that is citizenship. There's two ways to become an American citizen, right? You can be born an American citizen, or you can become a naturalized citizen, where you go through this, to take these tests and do the ceremony, and then you're a naturalized citizen. In general, a naturalized citizen and a natural born citizen are the same. They have the same rights, but a natural born citizen does have a few more rights than a naturalized citizen. For example, a natural born citizen can become president, whereas a naturalized citizen can't become president. And I'm just bringing this up as an example because what we see here is Jesus is, because he's born, he gets all those rights and privileges as any man would. On top of being born into this world, he does something else that is crazy, which he experiences this world in its curse. Because Adam was cursed and the world was cursed, the way that Jesus came into this earth, he experienced the curse as well. He had to, work, he had to eat, he had to do all of these things, and he had to, he died. Now, I'm just bringing this up. This is part of the aspect of what makes Jesus fully man, in the sense that he was born again. He was born as a man, so he has all of these uh, intrinsic rights as a man because of that. And he also experienced this. And we'll talk some more as we get through this passage about some other things that Jesus did, which is pretty incredible. But I just want to bring that out. I'll let somebody respond if they want to before we jump into the first verse here. Anybody have any thoughts before we jump in?
It's a nice preface.
Go ahead, Eric.
No, it was a nice preface. Thanks.
He still retained godly powers. Imagine
But he
being
didn't.
Imagine
Oh,
being
go
a
ahead.
teenager, being omniscient and all powerful.
Hmm.
I mean, he was probably tempted many times to use what he knew or what he could do.
Yeah.
And he had to restrain himself.
It is incredible to have that much power and authority and do, as you said, Bill, to restrain yourself, right? Because probably none of us would be able to do that if we had the power of, when we get upset at somebody because they've legitimately wronged us, we're gonna do something about it, right? But Jesus doesn't. He does something different. He takes a different approach. And again, this just shows how different he is, because he is, as you mentioned, Bill, he is also God. He is fully God, in the sense that half his ancestry also is God, which it's a hard thing to understand.
Well, it's kind of like the Trinity. We don't
Well,
fully understand.
so I will say one thing, and in considering this and not doing a thorough effort that I'd like to have done this week, but the way I'm looking at this is, it's because that you mentioned the Trinity. The Trinity is incomprehensible. However, what I think we have here is a bumper sticker summary statement. that is the conclusion of an explanation.
Yeah.
And we're working backwards from something that's cryptic.
Yeah.
It seems to me we should develop how he's fully man and how he's fully God, which you are doing, and then come to that conclusion, because the bumper sticker is extremely cryptic.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's that complicated. I mean, I think it's deep, but it may not be as complicated as something like the Trinity, although it's somewhat related to that. But because it's a natural thought I had as well, Bill. But I don't know. The fully man, fully God, again, is just not quite the same problem.
And I think you're right. You're right. And I think maybe we get caught up on the fully man aspect because, hey, I'm fully man as well. And that means if I say Jesus is fully man and I'm fully man, then we get this idea that we're the same in all aspects. But we're not. Like, I'm fully man and Tim is fully man, and we're not the same, right? We're different. We live in different parts of the world, although I say that like it's really far away. We're just different towns. You know, we're different, and so we just have to be careful. I think one of the main keys we want to take away from this as we're going through this passage is that Jesus is fully man, and one of the aspects that means is he was born as a man, and he retains all of the rights and responsibilities into that because of his lineage. His lineage can be traced back to Adam, so all of those, and our lineage can be traced back to Adam, and in that sense we are brothers in that sense, which I think we should get into the passage because we're going to talk about that some more. So in verse 10 it says, let's read that. It was fitting for him for whom are all things and by whom are all things, and bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through their sufferings. And this is a cool verse because it's like you're saying two different things here, Mr. Hebrew author. For it was fitting for him who are all things and by whom are all things. First of all, he's pointing out again that Jesus is God because all things are for him and in all things are they exist, right? This is the common type of phrasing that we hear in different parts of the Bible where all things were made through him and in all things are. It's just, that's what he's telling us. Jesus is God in that aspect. But then it says this cool thing, in bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through the sufferings. And so we just have this again, he's pointing out how Jesus is man, and then he throws in this part where, but Jesus is still God. And so I just want to point that out as we're going through here and as we're discussing it, and we may accentuate the humanity part of man. If it sounds heretical, we're not being heretical, right? We're not saying Jesus is man. We're saying he is man, but he is also God. And I think Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, is throwing this in here too, just so they understand. He's not saying that Jesus is just a man. He's not just a man.
I'll also add, I had for the first time ever, a Jehovah's Witness knock on my door this week.
Oh,
all right.
Ooh.
So I'm glad we had the
in.
conversation last week. It was
God might have been preparing you a little bit then.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, so we see this. He is God. And then he says he's bringing many sons to glory, to make the captain of their salvation. So we have this picture here, and we don't want to miss it here, that Jesus is this captain of salvation. That is, he is our leader. He is the instigator. He is the organizer. He is that one who brings salvation. And this is important to understand because, again, the author of Hebrews is pointing this out. There's no path to salvation other through Jesus. He's the one. And there is both the plan of God and what Jesus does, which is, I'm going to stop. This is one of those weird things where I want to say something, but I'm like, it's not quite right, and it's going to sound heretical, and I'm not. So we'll stop. But please forgive me if I say something that sounds totally wrong, and you're like, if I take that out of context, John, you're a heretic. I'm not. I'm trying to be faithful to what the passage is saying here. But we see this here. He is the captain of our salvation. And it is for all of mankind. You can see that, by whom are all things, in bringing many sons to glory. So we have this Jesus who is also God, and the plan of salvation goes through him, and he's bringing in these sons of glory, to glory. Who do you think these sons are? I'm excited about this part, so I might jump in on you. Yeah, it's Mark. He's one of the sons to glory. It's true. But I am too. I don't want to burst your bubble too much, but we are all sons to glory, right? He's bringing us to glory. And then he says this crazy thing where he is bringing them, he's bringing many sons to glory. And again, this is just this cool picture of, it's not, our salvation is never based on anything we do, right? It is all the work of Jesus. He's the one who brings the many sons to glory. So there's just this cool picture. Jesus is God. He is man. He's not just any old man. He is the Son of God. And so there's this cool picture here. Oh man,
John,
I have just talked a whole bunch, and I look at my notes and I just skipped a whole bunch of stuff. So I got to take a pause and see if anybody wants to say anything.
no, that was the first thing that jumped out to me, that he is. He's the captain of our salvation. That was the thing. You just hit it on the head. But I also noticed that as well. And I was just like, and he's the source. I mean, everything it's about him, and he's allowing us to be a partaker of that. And it's all predicated on his power. Everything is on his shoulders. And we just get a part of it. But it was just fascinating to see that he's the captain. And that when I get a captain, I get it in mind, a ship that's going somewhere, and the captain's directing it, getting everyone in alignment. It's preparing it. He's driving it. He's everything. And so that's just a beautiful thing.
So
I mean,
no,
go ahead.
what comes to my mind is this, that when I was in the service, if a captain walked into the room, you were to, 1, salute him, and 2, obey him.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that jumps in my mind, is him being the captain, is that we need to obey him. And what does he say? The whole Bible says, follow these rules, follow these compasses of being moral people and being truly led by him and not by anybody else like ourselves. And so that's what jumps out at me when it says he's the captain. He's in charge. He's the one we need to obey.
Tim, what were you gonna?
Oh, I was just going to mention, in my translation, it says pioneer. He's our pioneer. And I go back to the old metaphor that the pioneers are the ones that take the arrows. So he's the one that's out front, and he's the one that took the slings and arrows to set us on a path of righteousness.
Yeah.
So apparently
I
we have
mean-
a lot of words.
Yeah.
Mine is NASB. It's author, and
Yeah.
it's consistent with the Vulgate, and alternatively leader. So it's, but I like captain as well. I mean, any of them. And thinking about this, because the capitis is the head, right? So, and that's very consistent to look at it that way.
Well, and it's
And
interesting, Tim, that you brought up pioneer and captain, because you kind of think they both kind of take the arrows, because what's the old saying? The captain goes down with a ship, right? So he stays with it until it's
Unless you're in the Air Force.
I mean, these are all these great descriptions, because they show us that not only is he the one who, I like that word author, he's the one who determines the direction and what's going on, but he's also, as you guys said, he's the leader. He's the one that's in charge. He's the one who has the responsibility of our salvation too, right? Because as being captain, although you might be thinking, I'd make a great captain, you know what? You might make a good captain, but Jesus makes a much better captain. He is also, as we've talked about, God, and he knows these things. He knows what the best way to approach something is, what the best direction is for something. Whereas we might just have an idea of what the best direction is, and it could be wrong. So it's just I like all of these pictures. He's the one who's going to lead us there. But as Sean said, he also has authority. And when you do what the captain says, when you're on a boat, right? I'm pretty sure the captain's word is basically law. I mean, especially when you're out there in international waters, you got to do what the captain says, or you're in big trouble. So, all really good stuff.
I think there's so much to say in verse 10. You take every part of that verse, starting with just for it was fitting. What does that mean?
Yeah.
For whom all things, and that's all of Colossians, right? You get a lot Colossians, the beginning of Colossians, and I think there's just so much. But what bounced out to me was also perfect through sufferings. And that's really interesting. Yeah. I don't know if you're going to go there later, John, but
that's our next step. So this is a good segue. So you start us off. This is good.
It was interesting. Just think about what does that mean, and it seems like I was looking at the different translations, or at least from the root word, there's this sort of idea of, and we always know when we talk about perfect, it isn't perfect in the sense of what we might think of perfect. Sometimes it's you bring to fruition the maturity or the full implication or the full picture of what that is. And of course, that meaning love. And it's really, really interesting, right? I mean, that we think about God's love, which is always perfect from the very beginning, even in the Trinity, but demonstrated for the very first time through suffering. And that's an angle of love in which, apart from suffering, that's a one prism or one angle you could look at love and understand it when it's presented through the lens or prism of suffering. When somebody does that, you can understand love. But before Jesus did that, and I know we took on his image, so we understand, because in the midst of sin, people had to suffer, and other people chose suffering out of love to benefit others. But yet, in this case, God himself, who has perfect love, for the very first time suffered, if you will, in that sense, to demonstrate for us what his heart is for us. And I think, and I love John 1 when John says, no one has seen God, but Jesus has declared him. And there's a love here through suffering that we can see. That is, I think it's incredible to see how much God has done and shown us through his love, in which otherwise we may have reason to question what kind of love is this. But now we don't, because of what Jesus has done. I mean, that's the short version. I there's so much going on in my head just through those words.
No, so, I like I said, I'm super energetic today. I don't know what the deal is, and so I just somehow just jumped all the way and skipped a whole bunch of stuff. So I appreciate you pulling us back a little bit, Rich. But I want to ask a question then, because this is related to what you're talking about. What are some of the ways that Jesus suffered? Because I think this might be more than just the cross. But what do you guys think are some of the ways that Jesus suffered?
He was born, and he was humbled himself to be changed his diapers, to be fed, to be taken care of by us.
Oh, that's a good one. Imagine being God and somebody's changing your diapers. That is crazy.
Yeah, and sorry, I don't have the passage in front of me, but it's John 17:5. his final words really reflect on what you're saying. I'm sorry, who was that spoke? Was that
Rich
Dan?
or Sean?
Sean,
Sean.
sorry. It's hard to, there's a lot of people on the screen. But imagine being with God before the beginning and then confining yourself to birth and a baby and then this life ahead. That had to be it's like being through the birth canal your entire life, only worse. So I like that, going right back to the beginning with the birth.
You think of some other ways
Yeah,
that Jesus
the
suffered?
separation from the Father.
Okay, that's a good one.
He was with the Father for all eternity, and now he's physically separated from the Father. Yeah.
And then he took our sin upon us, and he's emotionally, in some degree, separated from the Father during that cross period too. This is
Right.
a
Even
crazy
more,
thing.
when he took all the sin, he's even farther separated from the Father.
Yeah.
And for us, we have claustrophobia when we walk into a room without windows, maybe, or a closet. The infinite God constrained to time, space, and flesh.
He also had to deal with 12 knuckleheads. And
I think that's a big one.
Even there, knowing that one of them was going to betray him.
Yeah.
I think that's a bigger disappointment than in suffering, is knowing this guy that I'm talking to is going to betray me so that I will suffer even more physically.
That's probably why he taught in parables.
And that's the aloneness that, and approaching the cross, the more isolated from not only God through his life, but man. Everyone abandoned him.
Yeah.
He was all alone in his work. And here it is. I'm here for the love of man, my creation. And they reject me. I mean, through and through, wholly, entirely. My friends, my fam. Well, I think in a manner, Mary did not, and the others did not. But
His
that's
brothers
an
did.
interesting, yeah. And others stuck around.
Something else would be the idea of knowing the night before what exactly is going to happen to him, and being there and saying, Lord, I want you to take this away from me, but I'm going to do your will and not mine. And then later on, he says, I could call down 12 legions of angels to come save me if I wanted to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I don't. I want to suffer this for you guys.
As we read through the ministry of Jesus, if we try to put ourselves in the place that he was in, there's so many different ways that it seems that he suffered, even more than what we would have experienced, because he also had the experience of being the fullness of God. And it's just, I mean, even something as simple as, I say simple, but it's not. He's fasting for 40 days, right? And then we have Satan coming up and tempting him. I mean, for me, 40 days without eating, I can't even imagine. I don't think I'd be thinking clearly after, 20 days, but 40 days, that's crazy. And he's suffering all through this. It's just incredible. And I want to bring up another point here, which is, I think what this is showing us again is that he is a man. All of this is showing us he's experiencing the world as a man. He is God, but he is also experiencing it as a man. This is this fullness of how Jesus is fully man, and this is showing us that they're suffering as a part of that.
Hey, John, I think it's kind of the other aspect of suffering is a father to a child, and seeing your child in distress and you can't do anything about it, and how that you know, I've seen my own children where they need help or they need support or medicine or whatever the case is, and there's nothing I can do. And what that does to me, and
Yeah.
Christ is walking on the earth, and he can just that and that part of I created you, and yet, you know, as Eric said earlier, you know, you were rejecting me, and just that cringing of that father to child relationship, and knowing that there's nothing that you cannot do, that helplessness.
Yeah.
And again, that, to your point, that not proves, but that shows his humanity, you know, and he had to just day in and day out, the shame that he had to walk in. The Pharisees telling him about the scripture that he wrote. It's just, it's like, I created you and I wrote that. Like, what are we talking about
Yeah.
here? But just the shame, you know, and just the love that he had for his children, and to see that he can't really help them, you know, at this specific time. He's going to do it at the cross.
Yeah. That's a good point, Mark. And even the aspect of, hey, I told you how you could recognize the Messiah when he came, and I'm here, and you're still not recognizing the Messiah when he came. There's all that aspects of, and we even see there was times where he would look over a city and he would weep because he would just recognize how much they needed him, and they weren't recognizing it.
It's very impactful, Mark.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Or when he'd heal someone, he'd be told you did it at the wrong time or the wrong place.
Yeah.
I mean, he's God.
Yeah. Yeah, this is all great, and this was God's plan. And it says that in the first part of verse 10, for he found it fitting to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. This is just an incredible, this was a plan that God had that is amazing, and I'm thankful for it. It's great.
So I don't know, still getting a feel for the parameters of this, but this is the plan from the beginning. I believe that in the sense that I believe that what Adam and Eve did was inevitable. It was not,
Right.
oh, they could have done well, because if they did, then we didn't need Jesus, in my opinion. If they could have done it. And again, the story of God showing us that we cannot do anything, live and walk without him to live. And here we are. This is the plan in the fullness of time.
Yeah.
It really is, in a way. It's all a birthing process.
Yeah.
Just, I guess my friend Bill's next to me on the screen. All I can think of is babies now. And, but it's the pain was necessary and essential as well from the beginning. I'm out there, and for sure this is just conjecture, but and thoughts that go through my mind. But from the beginning, he was going to suffer birth to take God, and if you put it all in a point in time, you crush everything together. It's the pain and suffering of creation.
It is a good point, because if we jump back to Genesis 3 and we see the curse there, God tells Adam and Eve that he is going to send someone to help them, and it is going to be a son. And I love this, the way he says it. It's going to be a son of Eve who's going to come, and Satan's going to bruise his heel and he's going to crush his head, right? So even from that Genesis chapter 3, we get this picture of the Messiah is going to come, and he's going to be born, and he's going to be born of woman, which at that time you're going to be like, yeah, so what? But it's really cool because we have Jesus, who has a natural mother but no natural father. And then also we see the suffering side of it. Satan's going to bruise his heel, and he's going to suffer. But at the same time, there's the promise that he's going to crush his head, right? There's the promise that death is, this whole curse This is not the plan. This is not God's plan. God's plan is to redeem us back to himself and to remove this curse. And this is we're at this weird point of time. I say weird, but it's been a few thousand years. But we're at this point of time where we're like in between those two promises, right? We have the curse and we have the promise of no curse. And that promise of no curse is coming, but we haven't gotten there yet. And at the same time, Jesus has proven himself, proven God by just demonstrating that death is not an issue. He can take care of death. It's all, I like how you just smash them all together, Eric. I like how I'm going to have to move on because otherwise I'm going to be stuck here. So let's move on to let's move on to verse 11. For both he who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all of one, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. And so we see this, and I want to talk about sanctified, but before we talk about that, just one clear point that we want to make sure we understand is Jesus, the Bible here is telling us that Jesus and man are one. That doesn't mean that we are divine and we are God. It's actually the opposite of that. What he's pointing out here, and if you read this in context, I know there's no problem, but just so we're all clear, what he's saying here is that Jesus is man. We are all of one type. We're all mankind. Jesus is included in that description of man. But it says he sanctifies for both he who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are of all one. What do you think it means to be sanctified?
Well, sanctified means to be set apart. So Christ came down and he was set apart for us, and
Yeah.
we are being sanctified. So we are being set apart also, because if you read the Revelation, there's going to be a separation of the people, of the sheeps and the goats. Well, we be the sheepies, and we're the ones that are going to be separated out in the end. And that's why I like how it says we are being sanctified.
Yeah.
We have been sanctified, but we are being sanctified. So it's a future tense that we're going to be set apart for him. We're called out to be sanctified for him on this earth, but we're going to be sanctified by him at the end.
I have a definition of sanctified. It says that you're made holy.
I love it. I love it. Made holy. But then that brings up another question, Jody. What does it mean to be holy?
It means like he said earlier, be set apart from God. Set apart from sin from God, for God.
Yeah. And I
Made
love
without
this.
sin.
Oh, go ahead.
Bill.
No, I was just saying made without sin.
And I'd say cleansed and ready to return to the presence of God, into God's holiness. Salvation is, we're ready. That's why we're saints, but not sanctified.
Being
Sanctifying.
sanctified.
When you clarified that, that's great. Yeah.
No, this is, and I love that.
I mean, we die unclean. I mean, we're unclean all the way in the flesh, and only in that, but it's only in the shadow of Christ, or in the cloak of Christ are we sanctified. I'm sorry.
No, this is all good. One of my pet peeves is, it's not a big one, but it's just that sometimes Christians, we can use these words that we're used to using, and we say it, but what does it mean? We just are used to saying it, so we're not 100% sure necessarily when we use the word sanctified or we use the word holy, and so it's a common word and a common phrase that we might say as Christians, but if you try to explain it to a non-Christian, can you? Because what does that mean? Go ahead.
the Lord's Prayer, and I'm sorry for referring to the Vulgate, but the words are the same. Holy is thy name. In the Latin, it's sanctificator, which means sanctified.
Yeah.
Let your name be holy, right?
Yeah.
And when that echo, it's what echoes to me when I hear we are sanctified through him, or he's the captain of our salvation. To me, it is that, and it's the reunion, and somebody mentioned Revelation. It is the wedding that we are prepared for.
So I like that Sean brought up Revelation, because I just want to point out that there in Revelation we have this scene. I think it's in chapter 4, maybe it's in, I don't know, maybe it's in chapter 2. We have this scene of the angels being around the throne of God, and they're just saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." And so we get this picture of Jesus, who is not just holy, but he is holy, holy, holy. And actually, some translations, they have that word holy 9 times. Some of the manuscripts do. Not translations, sorry. Some of the manuscripts, the older ancient manuscripts, they say holy 9 times. They're trying to get this point across, that God, Jesus, is the ultimate in holy. He is completely set apart. He is completely unique and completely different. And when I think of holy, one of the ways that my mind gets around it is the opposite of holy is profane or common, right? So by looking at the opposite, he's saying he is not profane, he is not common, he is unique, he is pure, he is just, holy is just a great word, but I just want to make sure we get there. He's holy. And then I like this picture of us being sanctified. It's this picture of us becoming more like him. We're becoming more like him. He is the ultimate in holy, and we're becoming more holy. We're not going to be him, but we're going to become more like him. And I just like this whole picture.
I know we're far away from Hebrews 10, but one of the favorite verses there was, for by one offering, he has perfected those who are being sanctified. And that whole dynamic is amazing to think about. Well, we're being sanctified, but also positionally, we've been perfected in Jesus. And it's mind blowing. Like because again, we're in time, so we can't quite, we can understand the concept, maybe just in the sentence structure and the meaning, but the way God sees it is pretty amazing to think the privileges and the position and what's been given when it says, you've been born again. He gave the right to become children of God. I mean, it's a mind-blowing thing of what has already happened, and yet versus what is happening. And we usually are focused on what is happening, because it's a struggle still. this is sanctification process because of who we are, but yet again, I think Paul has this in mind when he says rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice because there's a perfection that's already been completed, at least according to Hebrews and a whole lot of other places that we can't see yet, but yet it's already been written about, and that day is coming. And Jesus says, no one's going to snatch you out of my hand. And it's a beautiful thing that it's just like, it's mind blowing. But those things I think, need to be reminded. They need to impact us, not only in the spirit, but in our emotion, in our mind, in our direction, in our viewpoint, in our, what's the word I'm looking for? Worldview, that it fundamentally changes what we're aiming for, who we're aiming for, and the glory and the future that we're hoping in. And it's anyhow, I didn't go off on, I mean, you know,
it sounds great.
This group knows exactly what I mean, but anyhow.
I think that's the perfect segue to the last part of this verse, which it says, for he who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all of one, for which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. And I think what I'm catching from what you were saying, Rich, is that we are all part of this family. We are brothers. Jesus is our brother in this aspect. He's saying that he's saying that we are his brothers because we are all man. And this should change how we treat other people and how we view the people around us, because he's not just talking about me, right? Yeah, I'm great. I'm also the same family of Jesus. I'm a man just like he is. But he's also talking about you guys too, right? You're also man, you're also brothers in the sense that he's pointing out that we're all mankind, and this plan that he has as captain applies to all of us. So it's just it should impact how we view other people as well, because they are in this family. Does anybody want to talk about this? He is not ashamed to call them brothers. Why do you think he's, well, I should back up. Should he be ashamed of us?
He has many reasons to be.
And this is, I'm sorry, I'm brain dead, John. On the contrary to you, I got like 1 hour of sleep. And so forgive me if I talk too much, but the thinking in terms of fully man, what does that mean? And trying to, I think we're sifting through that a little bit. When we say fully man, I think there's a double meaning.
Okay.
If you really look at what Jesus is doing here, he is gathering us all into one as the intention in him, and in a manner, him being the head of the body, the captain of our salvation, but the head of the body in heaven. So there's the spiritual aspect, and I'll just use the best words I can find. He is fully man in heaven, and I don't mean it's a different meaning of what fully man is. Man's fullness is in Jesus Christ, and man is created by through Jesus Christ and for Jesus Christ, and it's in the unity, even in the heavenly or the spiritual aspect. He's fully man.
Yeah.
And that's a different meaning than when we say he was fully man on earth in his earthly ministry, but it's potentially equally true when you look at it that way. But that's why looking at this bumper sticker again can be very, I'm not sure I like it anymore. We may come to understand it, but it's not the best way to talk to people. It's just some people say, oh no, he's not God. Then we start saying, well, he's fully, and he was never a man. You get two extremes in the cults that we have.
True.
JWs and Christian Scientists. They're on two opposite ends of the spectrum. And we say, no, it's both.
Yeah.
He was fully a man, and he is fully God. So that's why we come up with these things. But I don't think it's the best expression in the world.
The problem we have with saying he's fully man, which is the difference, is he never sinned. And we, as being humans and being fully man, we do sin. And that's my struggle, is when we say he's fully human, then the problem I have is that he didn't sin. And we as human beings, ultimately we are born in sin, born through sin. And that's the biggest struggle that everyone has with saying he's fully man, is that he didn't sin.
So this is why I went back to the beginning and what Jesus is teaching us is to be that we cannot do anything without him. And what Jesus did in having being born of the Holy Spirit as well, I'll, for lack of better words, better tuned to the Holy Spirit, better tuned to the Father, and to be able to follow the Father's will, and vice versa, for the Father to convey his will so thoroughly to flesh. It's if he did not rely on the Father, would he not have sinned? He is a finite. I don't really subscribe to him being omniscient or omnipotent as Jesus in and of himself. He's only that within what the Father permits him to do. As is, I don't have the scripture numbers, but it's because of his dependence and reliance constantly on the Holy Spirit that I think allowed his flesh to be subdued as a man, not using his godly powers not to sin, but using his dependence on the Father. I
Right,
hope I
and
made sense. That's what I'm struggling
what
with.
what I was getting to is that we don't know how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before they sinned. It could have been in our lifetime, it could be whatever, a year, 10 years, 15 years, but sometime in there, they were also without sin, which is what we can too. So that's what I was trying to get at is he was sinless because he was born in our sinful world. But before time, before Adam and Eve sinned, there was a time when they too were sinless. And that's where we have to kind of remember, that's why he can call us brothers, which is what the question was. He can
But
call us
even, and that's just something it's near and dear to my heart. That's why I use the word inevitable, that they sinned. They're finite human beings, they're finite creations I love what John said in the very beginning, that we have an idea of what is right, but we're not quite there. And as finite beings, given the will and the ability to perceive something such as God, we are faced with decisions, choice, will. And I think it's inevitable for a finite human creation that they will make a quote unquote mistake that will make the wrong choice. And I think it goes part and parcel, the inevitability of making the wrong choice when you're finite. You don't have all the information, you don't have all the knowledge, you don't have all the understanding of the consequences. I really, so that's my expression of the original sin, really. Certainly all my opinion, but to me, it seems to fit. And so that's why I even think it was before the fall that this was the plan, right? It was the plan from the first thought of creation that the cross was essential for a finite creature to be whole in the holy presence of God. So sorry, I've now gone on long enough on the concept, beating a live horse. So
I haven't heard that one.
Mhm.
This is, unfortunately, we're out of time. I got so many thoughts that you've popped up, Eric. Okay, I guess we'll have to. I know. We'll have to continue this possibly next week. We'll see how Tim, if he can wrangle us in, or if.
Gee, thanks, guys.
But we're gonna we'll end here. I think one of the problems that you might be having, Eric, is what it means to be man. And I think I'll just end on this and have the last word because I can, which is that what does it mean to be man? When we say somebody is man, for me, what pops into my head, and I think what pops into a lot of people's head, is that man was created in the image of God. And and that means that we aren't our physical bodies. We are the part of us, our soul, the part of us is in the image of God. And I think part of the hang up that we have with calling Jesus fully man is we attribute it to our body and what we think of humans at this particular point in time. But this is not how we were in the beginning of creation. They didn't die, at least, so there was something different. And at the end, when Jesus comes back and sets up his kingdom, and at some point we'll get new bodies and it'll be different. So I part of this is our misunderstanding of what man is. But I just want to bring up this one cool point that's in Colossians, which I believe you read Sunday morning, which is that Jesus is the image of God. So it's just really interesting. We're made in the image of God, but Jesus is also the image of God. And in that aspect, we are the same. We are man. Just trying to nail down what it means to be man. I don't know that we're capable of doing that. We can be introspective to some degree, but we don't have enough information to really get the big picture of what it means.
Amen. to
So
that.
let's pray. Who's up for praying this morning? All right, you're too slow. I'm going. Let's pray.